evangelicals to be part of this movement. He needed an issue other than defense of racial segregation in the late 1970s.
It was the most politically sensitive case before the Supreme Court this term. The ruling has dealt a severe blow to the Reagan administration and to private schools that discriminate. The justices have ruled the government must deny tax breaks to schools in violation.
I'm very sad for America. I think we witnessed today the death of religious freedom murdered by the Supreme Court.
When the constructors of the religious right came together in 1980, they made their principal battle cry to turn the Supreme Court. Why? Why would they do that? Why would they choose the Supreme Court? A conservative majority in the Supreme Court has absolutely never protected the rights of people of color or women or any minority. So if your goal is to preserve white patriarchy, then you want a conservative Supreme Court. The masterminds of the religious right did not raise the white supremacy flag. They raised the abortion flag in order to get the same result. And they got it.
In this historic decision, the Supreme Court has now overturned Roe v. Wade.
This is the moment America and women's rights went back in time. The ruling is a win for conservatives and the Christian rights influence on the court and in politics.
6 extremists on the United States Supreme Court have decided that they can force all of America to bend to their personal religious and moral views.
The White House Rose Garden was the scene today for photo ops, waiting for President Reagan and Judge Sandra O'Connor to stroll casually into view.
In 1981, President Reagan nominated Sandra Day O'Connor to the Supreme Court, but conservative evangelicals felt betrayed. She was pro-choice.
We are very disappointed at the president that he's apparently going against the 1980 Republican platform.
Right-wing opponents of her nomination were claiming that she's not only pro-abortion, she was also alleged to be an active feminist.
The White House people who were sent here, they ran against Washington to get elected, but they have now been co-opted by Washington. I'm not the kind of conservative that says preserve the status quo, because I think the status quo in large measure is awful. Rather, let us change the premises upon which we're operating.
Paul Weyrich realized the Republican Party was not committed to his goal of a theocratic America. He wanted revolution, not accommodation. In 1981, Weyrich co-founded the Council for National Policy, a secretive network to spearhead the Christian nationalist movement. 40 years later, it has become one of the most influential political organizations in the country.
Paul Weyrich was grand architect of the movement. He talked about the way that his vision of religion needed to dominate every aspect of American culture and society. They realized that this was going to go against the majority of Americans, but they felt they had the right and the obligation to do that. Now, why did they feel entitled to dominate American society? Why should these people have dominion over the rest of us? A lot of the Council for National Policy's vision was rooted in a form of Calvinism, where the belief was that God favored certain people and that was reflected in their level of prosperity. So if you were a very rich person, that's because God had predestined you for salvation. And on the other hand, if you were a poor black single mother in Milwaukee, that was because God had predestined you to be that, and he did not favor you with the wealth and riches.
I don't think we have to apologize for God's blessings, but money is not the focus of our life.
Isn't it easy to say that if you're actually the only rich guy standing there?
It takes a lot of money to do what we do. You said that you don't like to fly commercial because you don't want to get into a tube with a bunch of demons. Do you really believe that human beings are demons?
No, I do not. And don't you ever say I did.
You need to send in $35,000. You need to send in that $100,000 check. If you do not write that P.O. box and you do not call that toll-free number, you will never see sustainment in your life and your dream will die.
So their whole worldview was to increase income disparity as a gesture of God's will. A lot of their writings sound as though they believe they have a direct line to God.
At the core of Weyrich political ambitions to overturn democracy was Rousas Rushdoony's vision of a theocratic government.
If democracy exalts man to the place of God and the will of man to the place of God, it will fail. And it is failing today.
One of the very foundations of Rushdoony's theology, often called dominionism, is to try to reconstruct the nation along Christian lines, according to the Bible, according to biblical foundations. And democracy, especially liberal democracy, isn't really necessary to that. As a matter of fact, liberal democracy is kind of the enemy.
And you think democracy has substituted what for the kingdom of God?
The will of the majority. The will of the majority.
If we love these liberals as we must, if we love these people who are, despite the terrible pain that it takes to even say it, helping to murder the unborn as we must, then we want what is right for them. And what is right for their immortal souls is to get them out of public policy in this country.
In Paul Weyrich's eyes, the goal was winning. The goal was conservative Christians in positions of power in being able to dictate how things go in our country, not ensuring that fair elections happen.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Since the election, Republican state lawmakers have introduced over 250 bills in 43 states to limit voter access.
The law bans the use of ballot drop boxes and allows the state legislature to take over local election boards.
You're going to vote for Trump whether you like it or not. You got no choice.
We are seeing rejection rates from anywhere between 25 to 40%.
It is designed to ensure that we have minority rule in the United States, that we don't have a democracy.
This is not Jim Crow. This is James Crow Esquire. He went to school, got a law degree, and he has come back to try to take out every progressive voice in this nation.
At the touch of a button, millions of letters a year portray a world bristling with enemies and call for help, meaning money.
Direct mail gave the council nationwide reach to build their grassroots movement. But to truly change the culture, they needed to find a more substantial donor base.
In Oklahoma, where I grew up, we called it the buckle of the Bible Belt, and that certainly included Texas and Louisiana. But those are also the centerpieces of the American oil industry. In the 1980s, you have the entry of these incredibly wealthy oil barons putting money into political campaigns and political operations. And so they found that they had natural allies with fundamentalists and evangelical Christians. The church people work for the oil companies. The oil company people go to the churches. One hand washes the other.
Weyrich struck a deal with oil and gas billionaires. In return for their support, he would make the council a powerful political voice for eliminating their corporate taxes and regulations.
If you look at the roster of the Council for National Policy, you see these names surface again and again from these key states.
the Council for National Policy was founded as a place where major money could be invested toward making their narrative the mainstream interpretation of what it meant to talk about moral issues in public life. And I think that was very much a response to the role of religious leadership in the mid-20th century and in the civil rights movement. The power of a voice like Martin King's demanded a moral majority to answer it. And they knew that if they didn't do that, they were going to lose that struggle for the moral narrative. Well, I was born in rural North Carolina in tobacco country the Sunday after Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980. An incredible amount of money was invested in targeting communities like ours to use our religious identity to make us part of a voting coalition of white people in the South and in the suburbs and across the Sun Belt. It became something that I, as an earnest kid, took very seriously, and I wanted to do everything that I could for Jesus, and I thought that meant I needed to become president of the United States. So that was my goal as a teenager, and it's what got me involved in the kind of formation programs that the religious right had established for people like me. I figured out how to apply as a 16-year-old to be a page in Senator Strom Thurmond's office. He was an old-school racist. He campaigned on segregation and explicit racism for as long as he could survive that, but when he crossed the Rubicon, he learned to speak in a different way. We were told to vote for people like Strom Thurmond because they were pro-life. What I began to see when I got up close and began to participate in the so-called pro-life politics is that it really didn't have much to do with serving life. Senator Thurmond was the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and so there was a whole lot of talk about how to serve the interests of military contractors. I began to question whether biblical values really mattered very much to these folks. When I came back to North Carolina after that experience in Washington, D.C., I went to a meeting that the governor's office hosted, and there was a motivational speaker. By the time he had finished with this group of, young political hopefuls, he had all of us up on our feet. It was almost a sort of tent meeting revival kind of feel, and I wasn't entirely sure what had happened to me. So I got to know the Reverend William Barber as a 17-year-old kid, and he began to introduce me to the long tradition that he was part of. A tradition of people who took their faith very seriously, but always connected that with work for justice in the world.
I think it's an abdication of my Christian responsibility not to remind politicians that the budgets you pass in these legislatures is a moral document. That if you pass a budget that hurts poor people and takes health care from sick people, that in fact you are violating fundamental values of the Christian faith, which are love, justice, and mercy.
Christian nationalism is incredibly powerful because of the money that's been invested in it, but I think it's also absolutely essential that people realize it is not the majority position in this country. It's not even the majority position among Christians. I think it's absolutely imperative that we lift up the witness of people who practice a different kind of faith.
This is the first time that we've been attacked on our soil, and by far the worst result. I really believe that the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians, all of them who tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen.
At the turn of the century, the religious right wielded significant political power. But American society was no closer to their vision of a Christian nation. No one was more disheartened than the movement's architect.
We are continuing to decline as a nation. Our culture is continuing to decline. When all is said and done, it doesn't matter whether you have a minimum wage or not. And it doesn't matter, what kind of trade policy you have, if in fact the moral fabric of a society has disintegrated.
Weyrich commissioned a manifesto which describes in detail how a Christian elite will take power in America by waging an insurrectionist war.
The manifesto is the purest distillation of Weyrich ideas that we have. They felt that the political arena was inadequate. They weren't guaranteed of winning elections. And in fact, played by the rules, they would lose more and more elections unless they figured out some detours.
The Council for National Policy and the folks who were coordinating their attempts to maintain control decided that they couldn't use the institutions. They needed to delegitimate and destroy them.
Many of their publications say our goal is to bring down the federal government as we know it. I mean, what is this image? Trump is God's chaos candidate. What are they doing to the American flag? They're shredding it, right? That's what's going on here. They're shredding it. So yes, it's been a declaration of internal warfare.
Because of our covenant with God, we are equipped and delegated by Him to destroy every attempted advance of the enemy. We take back and permanently control positions of influence and leadership in each of the 7 mountains.
One of the most common expressions of dominionism is called 7 Mountains Dominionism.
Take it from a Levite. Only 10% of the population is supposed to be involved with temple work. 90% takes territory.
The idea is that you can't take over society unless you take over the 7 crucial pillars. They realized that all of culture was against them. So they said, all right, we don't like Hollywood, we'll invent our own Hollywood. They've done that.
Spirit of God, I have chosen Donald Trump.
I saw it. It was like it was twisting and fighting. Everything that they told us is a lie.
At public universities, many students were liberal. All right, let's direct them towards Bible colleges and create this youth corps that Paul Weyrich asked for in his manifesto.
What we're doing at Turning Point USA, I believe, has the opportunity to significantly move the dial, because whatever happens on college campuses will soon happen in the halls of Congress.
They claim to have trained some 200,000 candidates and campaign managers through the Leadership Institute.
It will not be enough just to win the next election. We got to win the next generation. That's what the Leadership Institute is all about.
You go into every sector, and just as Paul Weyrich's manifesto laid out the plan, they've gone one by one to do it.
It's been a long time coming. But tonight, because of what we did on this day, in this election, at this defining moment, change has come to America.
The 2008 election swept Barack Obama and the Democrats into power and devastated the Republican Party. The council saw the 2010 midterms as an opportunity to exploit the weakened GOP.
In this election year in the United States, a majority of Americans say the country is on the wrong track. And no segment of the electorate is more frustrated with the U.S. government and President Barack Obama than the folks driving the Tea Party movement.
The Tea Party movement has a lot to do with Barack Obama's presidency and an unleash of white lash, which has always happened historically in the country in the face of black progress. But the Tea Party was also a reaction to the Bush presidency. What happens in 2008 is we have a mortgage crisis. Tens of millions of Americans lose their jobs, lose their homes. Not a single Wall Street banker goes to jail.
Americans believe that Washington is broken, that both parties are to blame, and the Tea Party movement is an expression of that sentiment.
What Tea Party voters believe by 2009 is this. Barack Obama set out to change America and he succeeded. But he didn't do it alone. He did it with the help of a corrupt, feckless, weak Republican establishment who sold out.
The council enlisted Tea Party members to compete against incumbent Republicans. With massive funding, their candidates had a chance to infiltrate the Republican Party.
A lot of the groups that you've supported have essentially provided financial fertilizer for the Tea Party. Would you agree with that?
Yes. If we had to agree with everything a group or a person stood for, we would never do anything.
The Koch brothers put $50 million, $50 million, into a state-of-the-art political data platform called I360. And the organizations affiliated with the Council for National Policy paid to develop a series of apps that could implement the data and use it for highly targeted political campaigns in critical swing states. And they had considerable success through their operations.
The Republicans will take control of the House of Representatives.
The Tea Party captured political lightning in a bottle and helped elect dozens of new congressmen. They came in on a promise to shock Washington into spending less, cutting more.
The council's gambit worked. The success of the Tea Party brought Christian nationalists into the GOP.
So what you have is the Republican Party trundling along in its traditional way, but this parallel structure that's growing up that's going to supersede it. And it gets to the point of power and influence that it can mount a hostile takeover of the Republican Party.
Kill the bill! Kill the bill! Kill the bill!
We are seeing in state capitals across the South and other places Tea Party extremism, where the argument is the way to a better society is to deny education, deny health care, deny voting rights, deny women's rights. And then if you want to really have a great society, the extremists are saying give people more guns and give more tax cuts to the wealthy. That kind of policy demands a moral response. We decided that if they were going to crucify health care, crucify living wages, and crucify voting rights, every crucifixion needs a witness. Every crucifixion needs somebody that's willing to call it what it is. Somebody asked me the question, when will you stop? Well, that's a question for them. Don't ask us when we'll stop. Ask Tillis and Berger and the man in the governor's mansion, when will they stop? When will they stop hurting children? When will they stop hurting the sick? When will they stop hurting our public schools? When will they stop hurting our economics? Because if they stop, we'll stop. But we can't stop as long as people are being hurt. Before the end of the summer, thousands of people showed up every Monday, and they looked like North Carolina. I mean, they were white people, black people, brown people, indigenous people, gay people, straight people, even Republicans. Something like 16% of the people who went to jail with us were Republicans. And so we wanted people to understand that racism is not just about hatred of black people. It is really fundamentally about hatred of democracy. And racism becomes a tool for feeding the corporate greed of a few who want an aristocracy and nothing that looks like a democracy.
Hand-raising questions. Is there anyone on stage who is unwilling tonight to pledge your support to the eventual nominee of the Republican Party and pledge to not run an independent campaign against that person? Mr. Trump.
I remember hearing from a family member that Donald Trump had met with a group of faith leaders and he had become a Christian. And we needed to view him, even though he has this horrible, morally depraved past, we need to view him as a King Cyrus.
President Trump will be like Cyrus.
Trump has the Cyrus anointing.
God was raising him up like Cyrus.
The point being that Donald Trump is going to be this pagan king that God is going to use to rebuild the America that is crumbling. I really don't think we can underestimate how powerful that was for a certain segment of the Christian community. You feel like you're participating in the prophecies and that something big is going to happen. So for part of the community, the support became not just hold your nose, but like a rapid encouragement and excitement about him.
What I'm concerned about is the reputation of evangelical Christianity and the credibility of the Church of Jesus Christ right now. When people who previously told us character matters are now just waving away really serious and shocking character issues as though they don't matter at all. It's just leaving a wreckage of cynicism in its wake. In the case of Trump, I was concerned that evangelical Christianity would become synonymous in the minds of people inside the church and outside the church with Trumpism. Many evangelical Christians agreed with me then. It wasn't until after the primaries that they didn't.
The evangelical leadership remained skeptical of Trump. So Ralph Reed, one of Wyrick's key disciples, decided to step in.
Please join me in welcoming the presumptive Republican nominee for president, Donald J. Trump.
Reed saw Trump as the perfect vessel to deliver on the council's goals.
Here we are, and here are the goals. We want to uphold the sanctity and dignity of life. As you know, I put a list together of highly, highly respected judges. And by the way, these judges are all pro-life.
Trump followed the script, and the council offered him a deal. They would pledge their network's resources to his campaign if they could influence his judicial and cabinet appointments. Trump agreed.
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
You didn't decide a verse that
No,
you like?
I don't want to do that. I mean,
Old Testament guy or New Testament guy?
Probably equal.
2 Corinthians, right? 2 Corinthians 3:17. That's the whole ball game. Where the Spirit of the Lord, right?
When people question how these fundamentalists with their relationship to the Bible can choose Donald Trump as their candidate, it's not because they identify with him and feel that he's one of them. It's because he can be an instrument. Trump can be the wrecking ball that they use to bring down the federal government that they have so many problems with.
I believe that God's using him to destabilize these progressive institutions, the penetration of that progressive ideology in these places, so that believers and other viewpoints can go into them and establish credibility also.
I believe without a shadow of a doubt, this is the last election. It's a math problem of demographics in a changing United States. If you look at the numbers of people who vote and who lives in the country and who Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton want to bring into the country, this is the last election when we even have a chance to vote for somebody who will stand up for godly moral principles.
What white evangelicals lacked in numbers, the council made up for through the vast network of faith leaders and high-tech megachurches which spread their message.
Our mission is to champion the pastors of America for the transformation of America.
Leaders of the movement know that pastors drive votes, and so they draw pastors into networks such as Watchmen on the Wall, which is an initiative of the Family Research Council. It has tens of thousands of affiliated pastors, and they delivered these pastors messaging materials that they can use to turn out their congregations to vote for the hyper-conservative politicians that the movement favors.
Father, we thank you for the grace that you have bestowed upon this nation.
President of the Family Research Council, Tony Perkins, was the president of the Council for National Policy. There is no error between them. And the Family Research Council publishes voter guides. They're called the iVoter Guides. They're allegedly nonpartisan, but you basically have the Democrat with their policies, which are things like Hillary Clinton supports the homosexual agenda, and Donald Trump supports American families. So choose one, right?
Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? This next Tuesday, you get the privilege to live out
a biblical Christian worldview when you go to the poll.
What this network of organizations has done has, for years, involved data mining of church directories, which are then cross-referenced with voter files. Pastors have been organized to facilitate this.
Council for National Policy has a series of very deep ties to adjacent organisations. GLUE, from 2015 through, was developing something that became known as the GLUE Insights micro-targeting platform. That's a platform that accesses and harvests data on all Americans. They've actively harvested data from churches, and most troublingly, they have accessed self-revealed mental health and behavioural health and treatment data, and they're using that for micro-targeted Facebook advertising to harvest very vulnerable individuals, and then they had a very high uptake of conversions and radicalisations entering into those large evangelical churches.
Now you think of your average target voter, and you go back a few years ago, and Ralph Reed announced, we've got 17, 18 million evangelicals who don't vote. How do we corral them into voting our way? Well, you surround them.
Every one of those households is going to be contacted by this organization 7 to 12 times.
So if you're this person out in Missouri, this is all the information you're getting. Newspapers have been dying off. Local news is disappearing from thousands of counties in the middle of America. And what fills that vacuum? It's Fox and Sinclair, which function and sing in harmony. So you don't have the newspapers. Your broadcasting environment has changed. When you go online, it's not just that you've chosen a silo. You are a target for a multifaceted operation of tremendous sophistication.
I've just received a call from Secretary Clinton.
A complete earthquake. This wasn't like any earthquake I've really seen since Ronald Reagan in 1980. It just came out of nowhere.
I'm looking at some numbers here. 81% of evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. You got it dead right.
This is historic. No Republican nominee has ever gotten that level of support from evangelicals.
There's been a lot of discussion as to how Donald Trump won the election. I believe it was God. God showed up.
With the council calling the shots, the wrecking ball went to work.
Her critics say she wants to privatize the public school system that she once called, quote, a dead end.
Donald Trump is forming his cabinet very much in his own image, white, male, and wealthy.
Trump named Scott Pruitt, sworn enemy of the EPA, to be the head of, what's the word? The EPA.
Some of these folks' only qualification is that they have attempted to destroy the very agencies that they are now hoping to run.
President Trump revoking the Obama-era law expanding federal protection to streams and waterways across the country.
Behind me, we have evangelical leaders. We're going to be signing a day of prayer.
President Trump has just signed a historic $1.5 trillion tax bill.
Trump told friends at his Florida club, "You all just got a lot richer."
National Security Advisor Mike Flynn saying the quiet parts out loud.
We have to have one religion, one nation under God, and one religion under God.
As Trump rose, all of these groups, Paul Weirich's group, people were viewed as fringe players, as extremists. They formed within the party the base of his movement.
The Conservative Action Project is a division of CNP. The president got tired of everybody coming to our meetings, so now we meet at the White House.
We are watching the foundation shift, and we're going back to our founding principles. We poured millions of dollars into judicial nominations and vetting to make sure the president picks the best judges.
I, Brett M. Kavanaugh, do solemnly swear, so help me God.
You are really special people. The support you've given me has been incredible, but I really don't feel guilty because I have given you a lot back, just about everything I promised. And as one of our great pastors just said, actually, you've given us much more, sir, than you promised, and I think that's true. in many respects.
I think most of Americans would be completely oblivious to the designs behind this, that there are intentions to enshrine Christian identity and a certain kind of Christian identity as the law of the land.
Meet Project Blitz, which funnels religious bills to state lawmakers all across the country. The ones that have been passed in 6 states already are the In God We Trust bills, which mandate that slogan go up in public schools.
Senator Marty.
Thank you, Madam President. 79% of Americans believe in some supreme being, which means 21% do not. And I would speak against it for the sake of the 21% who this is clearly not something that is welcoming or encouraging or comfortable for them. So as a person with strong religious beliefs, I don't want government pushing my religious beliefs or anybody else's religious beliefs on others. That's what the core of religious separation of church and state is about. It was probably a Thursday when we were voting on that resolution. On Sunday morning, I went to church, which I do on Sunday mornings, and I came home and our home answering machine was beeping and I listened to the message. It was a vile, obscene statement from some guy yelling at me for why I hate God so much. And it didn't take long to figure out what happened. It was on Fox and Friends that morning. Those of us must hate God, and therefore we were trying to block even this innocent little harmless thing.
Why is God, the mention of God in our schools, controversial for the left today?
There seems to be an anti-faith movement in our country to suppress anything that is religious in any way and wipe it out of government.
When we stripped God out of the schools, we replaced it with something else, like ideological indoctrination, and we're seeing the fruits of that right now.
Christianity is in the crosshair today. There is a concerted effort in this country by the secularists to ignore our history and turn us into an absolutely secular world.
Now, they're hunting Christians in many parts of the world, and we're not doing that in the States yet.
It's real and it is horrific. And yes, we know other faith groups are also being persecuted, but Christians have a giant X on their back.
The notions that evangelicals or the religious right is aggrieved in this country is, on the face of it, I think is preposterous. I think a case can be made that these people, in fact, are the aggressors. They're the ones who are trying to impose their values, their religious convictions on the remainder of society.
They're actually demanding a license to discriminate against those of whom they disapprove, and they're asking for an ability to override the law when it conflicts with their religious beliefs. For some Americans, that's a cause for alarm, and for others, it's the answer to their prayers.
1776, our founders boldly declared that we are all endowed with the same divine rights given us by our Creator in heaven, and that which God has given us, we will allow no one ever to take away, ever.
Christian nationalism really did create Donald Trump to the extent that without that kind of fear, Donald Trump would have had no chance. He wouldn't have even been close. But he was able to leverage that kind of rhetoric to appeal to a very powerful and influential voting bloc of Americans who felt like they had been wronged the last 8 years under Obama.
No, he's not an example of Christian virtue. No, there's not much about his life that you could compare to the life of Jesus. But neither has this movement ever been about shaping people in the way of Jesus. This movement has been about scaring white Christian people into believing that there is an enemy out there that's going to obliterate you. If you believe that, then you believe that in your home you need to have the biggest, baddest gun possible, and in the White House you also want the biggest, baddest gun possible, and Donald Trump is that gun.
Joe Biden's following the radical left agenda. Take away your guns, destroy your Second Amendment, no religion, no anything, hurt the Bible, hurt God.
Because it embraces this overtly religious language, Christian nationalism represents a tremendous threat to democracy. It's one thing if you feel like hey, my political position is correct, it is justified, it is backed up by research. But it is another thing when you feel like we are on the side of God and you are on the side of Satan. Your position is demonic, it is evil in a cosmic sense. If you bring the ultimate, if you bring the sacred into this argument, then you can justify just about anything in the service of defeating this evil power that is out to get your people, that is out to destroy your country, that God has a special relationship with.
I don't care what you think about fraudulent Sleepy Joe. He's a sex trafficking, demon-possessed mongrel. He's of the left. God, he's gonna burn the whole thing to the ground.
Now, to me, LGBT stands for let God burn them. But you say, well, it's LGBTQ. Well, then you could say, let God burn them quickly.
In some places in American life, we have a church growth movement, but for angry people. A sense of theatrical anger feels to some people like depth of conviction, when, of course, it's theater. But that can build a crowd.
Now we're going to fight to hopefully keep our freedom, because we don't wish this upon our children or upon our grandchildren, amen? But, ladies and gentlemen, they are censoring us like crazy. They are trying to shut down our voice. Like Paul Revere said, the British are coming, the British are coming. Well, the leftists are coming. In fact, they're already here. So we aren't afraid, we aren't fearful, but I'm telling you, the Bible's about to get really real.
When Biden says something about unifying the nation, people like me are convinced that we cannot unify with that, because good cannot unify with evil. And so I don't see a way of coming together in this issue at all. This is more of, we have to take a stand against this, and we have to defeat it. It has to be defeated.
Most of the Bible was written under persecution. Whether you like it or not, we're going into the soldier realm, where onward Christian soldiers as a hymn becomes real.
There is an intensity right now, and yes, I am very concerned that this is going to end up in a civil war. I think it's very important that every American home that can own as many weapons as possible. I think peaceful people that are well armed keeps a peaceful nation.
This is breaking news.
Around 2:30 this afternoon at a Tops supermarket, at least 10 people have been killed.
In a 180-page document posted online, the suspected shooter often referring to black people as replacers, a reference to the Great Replacement conspiracy theory.
I think the danger of white Christian nationalist rhetoric to Muslims, to Jews, to Hindus, to atheists, I mean, that's obvious, right? Not only are we subordinate, in many cases, we're the enemy. We are the reason that they need to rise, because not only do we need to be subordinate, we need to be defeated and vanquished.
Ms. Newman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Raskin. Whether it's an attack on a school, a nightclub, a synagogue, a mosque, a church, it really needs to stop.
In 2017, when I joined government as the Deputy Chief of Staff to John Kelly, I didn't notice any focus on domestic terrorism. The counterterrorism community was still very focused on ISIS. And then Charlottesville happened.
When you say the alt-right, what about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? You had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent.
Because of the way that the president reacted, domestic terrorism became another one of those no-go hot topics that if you raised at all to the president, he immediately became defensive. The Secretary of Homeland Security multiple times asked for the White House to include domestic terrorism in the counterterrorism strategy that the administration eventually released, and we were rebuffed. So by the time we have Christchurch and then sadly another attack in Poway, California, and that all leads us up to El Paso at the Walmart, and they're using language straight out of the president's campaigns. He has the opportunity to set the record straight. He doesn't do that.
Thank you to the Council for National Policy. Together we're committed to keeping America safe, strong, prosperous, and free.
The Council's gamble had paid off. Christian nationalists were firmly embedded at the highest levels of government. The Supreme Court had an absolute majority of justices poised to overturn landmark civil and women's rights decisions. Paul Weirich's vision of a Christian nation was becoming a reality.
The president is extremely well positioned for re-election. So we got to get past this coronavirus speed bump. It's unlikely that we're going to have a recession. If we don't and we do our job, historically, he should be re-elected.
Trump appeals to the authoritarian impulses of his supporters. They're often referring to him as a king, a biblical king, an imperfect leader through whom God chose to enact his will. Now, here's the thing about kings. They don't have to respect the rules. They are the law unto themselves. And that underscores the fact that this is an anti-democratic movement that doesn't believe in representative democracy.
CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States, winning the White House and denying President Trump a second term.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late.
Well, there we go. The president's comprehensively demolishing the American democratic process. It was almost as if he was describing a Zimbabwean election or something going on in Belarus.
The council went into full combat mode to support the big lie, and the entire Christian nationalist movement quickly fell in line.
This is a spiritual battle we are in. This is good versus evil, and we have to do everything we can to win.
We're actually standing in the middle of Jericho because we have penetrated the walls of Jericho, right? There is evil and there's corruption, and us inside of this barricade, we're going to knock those walls down, okay?
Michael Flynn was part of the Council for National Policy. On December 18th, he shows up in a meeting at the White House where there is a discussion of the imposition of martial law as a possible way of addressing the electoral crisis.
I mean, these people out there talking about martial law, it's like it's something that we've never done. Martial law has been instituted 64 times, Greg.
Martial law was about hoping that the January 6th event would create a state of what you could call controlled chaos. And there's a level of chaos that will require us to hold the election again.
I think that this is the biggest steal that we've ever seen. Donald Trump's a fighter, and we're here in Washington to back him up, bringing thousands and thousands and thousands of people this Saturday for our march.
All of a sudden, you see various components of the Council for National Policy coming in to participate. You've got Ali Alexander, who registers Stop the